Hi, and welcome back to my channel. Today, as part of our Joan January, I'll be reviewing Joan Crawford's 1941 film, When Ladies Meet. This film was adapted from a Rachel Carruthers play, who was a popular playwright at the time, famous for writing high comedies. When Ladies Meet is a story about a novelist in love with her married publisher who attempts to use her books to resolve her real-life love problems. Joan stars opposite Robert Taylor and Greer Garson in two wonderfully acted roles. You can see why MGM invested so much in Greer Garson just from her performance in this film. After all, Greer was being groomed to take Joan's place as the Queen of MGM when she was cast in this movie. I find it interesting that Joan didn't seem to object to this more strongly as she would with other co-stars in later films. Now, before we go any further, I do have to have a disclaimer that spoilers abound in this review. So if you want to watch this movie before you watch my review, go ahead and click off now. Okay, are you gone? Hello? Hello? Anyone there? No? Okay, great. Let's go ahead. So the film opens on Robert Taylor as Jimmy and Joan Crawford as Mary Howard engaged in a tryst that is seemingly forced on Mary. Joan is wearing the most beautiful gown designed by Adrian. I just love the headpiece. It's so chic. But anyways, focusing more on the scene. Jimmy's in love with Mary, but Mary's had enough of him. I love the way Mary acts in this scene as a woman who thinks she's found something that's elevated her above this tawdry, basic love that she's had with Jimmy, and she thinks she has something next level. So she just brushes him off like he's just the dust below her feet. I also like how Jimmy keeps calling her Minnie, even though she doesn't want to be called Minnie anymore, because I just feel like it captures who this character actually was prior to falling in love with a married man. And it helps to kind of create a further distinction between the way the men view her. So, Minnie is this just, she's your best girl. She's amazing. She's great. But she's not this romantic heroine in a love story. But Mary, on the other hand, Mary is a romantic heroine, somebody that you would leave your wife for. And I just kind of like that distinction. It's kind of fun how they play with it in the movie. Oh, and now, of course, how can I forget a further distinction? We have the glasses. Now, these glasses have no prescription in them, but Mary wears them to look smarter. It's such a silly little detail, but I think it perfectly captures how naive Mary is in this movie and in this scene. To think that just the glasses are going to make a difference for her and make her a more interesting person. And in walks a real treat in a role that really should have gone to Billie Burke, the queen of these kind of like baddie old lady, little rich women who are just a little out of it. We have Spring Byington as Bridgie, Mary's number one enabler and her best girlfriend. So now this whole scene, the tryst that was happening between Mary and Jimmy, was taking place in a private room. What is this? Presumably an apartment. Well, there's a party going on inside for Mary's latest book, and a lot of her fans are here, and they want autographs. So they come bursting into the room, along with everyone else, and Mary and Jimmy decide it's time to go out and join the others. But all the while, Jimmy has kept up and keeps badgering her about marrying him. And it's in the midst of all this badgering when we finally meet the married man that Mary has given up everything for. And it's so interesting because we can see an immediate change in her. She immediately stiffens. She puts her glasses on and assumes this kind of very airy, straightened spine. I'm not sure what you call it, but just uppity air that wasn't present when she was just talking freely with Jimmy. You can really see how the character of Mary thinks that this love with this married man is going to elevate her to a realm that is so out of reach for somebody like a Minnie that she couldn't reach it before. She can only reach it with this married man. And it's just so charming the way that Joan plays it. But, it really goes without saying this is a really bad idea to be in love with your married publisher, not only for personal reasons, but also work-related reasons, because imagine what could happen to your book if you were having an affair with your publisher. But Mary seems to not mind that at all, and is just all too happy to spend as much time with him as possible. The morning after the party, Mary is busy gardening when in walks Jimmy, complaining that she's constantly with Woodruff. Their conversation segues into Jimmy critiquing Mary's fictionalized book of her affair. And I love how he kind of points out that the characters just aren't real anymore because it's like they're inhabiting this whole other world. They don't act the way that real people would act in the situation she sets up in the book. It just kind of coincides so much with this whole air that she gets whenever she's around the married man and she's imagining her living out her fantasy as this heroine in a love story. Naturally, this upsets Mary a lot because it's challenging her fantasy world and she can't have that. While they're arguing, Bridgie and her boyfriend pop in to see Mary, and it's pretty amusing to me how Bridgie is playing the scene in the same way that like Billy Burke would play a character, but she's not nearly as funny. And while the actress plays her very animatedly, the character is kind of flat and two-dimensional. Whereas if I think Billy Burke played it, she could add a little bit more weight to it and make her a little bit more 3D. This same scene serves to set up the rest of the film. So Mary is going to stay with Bridgie at her house for the weekend and finish revising her book. Mary asks Bridgie to invite Woodruff without her wife, as it's business. And even though Mary tries to play it off very nonchalantly, like, oh, it's no big deal, it's just business, he's my publisher, Bridgie catches on that they're having this affair and they want them alone so they can spend time together. But instead of pointing out, oh, this is wrong, you shouldn't be seeing a married publisher, Bridgie is all too happy to go along with it, which is why I think she is Mary's biggest enabler in this story. Their conversation continues, and they kind of discuss how they think that Woodruff's wife must be an intellectual droop, and that must be why Woodruff never speaks about her to Mary. Which, this should set off Mary's red flags, but alas, she's blissfully ignorant and imagine him as this gallant man who doesn't want to speak illy of his wife, even though he's no longer in love with her. So naturally, Woodruff arrives next, and he gets invited to Bridgie's for the weekend, and he accepts. Bridgie makes an excuse to get Jimmy to drive her and her boyfriend downtown so they can leave Woodruff and Mary alone. Once Mary and Woodruff are alone, they begin to talk about the ending to Mary's book. Again, this is like an ongoing thing that has happened multiple times in the movie. Now you can really see how Mary is living in a dream world. I mean, I don't know why she thinks that if she's the one doing the cheating and it's for an elevated reason, like a real connection with somebody that's very magical, and he no longer loves his wife and the wife doesn't love him, she can get away and avoid any unpleasantness. But that's just not how these things with human relations go. So naturally, Woodruff does not like the ending and points out that if the two women actually met in real life, they would make a mess of everything, which can only be foreshadowing. Mary should be like, there should be a ringing alarm bell in Mary's head at this point saying he doesn't want us to meet. He doesn't want this to go anywhere. He just wants to have his side chick. But she doesn't because she's deliciously naive, and we continue. The next scene is Jimmy at a party where he meets Woodruff's wife, Claire. They have a conversation about sailing and other things, and he manages to get an invitation to go sailing with Claire for the following day. How convenient for this plot. I mean, really. So they go sailing, and it's followed by a kind of comedic sequence where Jimmy is trying to balance the boat, and he can't manage to balance the boat, and naturally they capsize, and they're both soaking wet, and that's the end of that. We next see Jimmy and Claire at a hotel, all cleaned up and ready to go. And Jimmy gets the idea to bring Claire to meet Mary at Bridgie's house. To accomplish this, he's got to get rid of Woodruff because he knows Woodruff is there because they're inseparable, Mary and Woodruff. So he calls Woodruff's valet or whatever service he has and leaves a message for Woodruff that this famous writer is going off to the city and he needs to meet Woodruff right away. And this sets Woodruff off on a wild goose chase, only to just get rid of him. Jimmy drives Claire to Bridgie's house and gives her the pretense, once they get there, that he wants to make Mary jealous because he's in love with her and she's taken up with another guy. And now the two women meet. As you can see, things are going along just fine as Mary and Claire are two charming, intelligent, and attractive women. But what I kind of love is how Joan plays her annoyance with Claire off a little bit too well, because you can see just by looking at Joan's face that she's a little bothered by Claire's flirting with Jimmy, and it's kind of funny to watch the way she acts the scenes. So the evening progresses, and there is a giant rainstorm that springs up and knocks a huge tree branch into the road in front of Bridgie's house, forcing Claire and Jimmy to stay for the night. Bridgie decides to put Claire into the room next to Mary, so naturally this is going to lead to some conversation between the two characters. Mary talks about her book and about the situation it represents, and they have a really interesting conversation because Greer is in a marriage that is a man that's cheating, and she knows what it's like to be the woman that's being cheated on. You can really see here how naive Joan is playing the character. The whole time Mary seems to think that Woodruff will leave her for him, and you can see how much Claire is hurt by this. In the middle of things, Woodruff comes home and walks into Mary's room, and Woodruff comes face to face with his wife, and Joan for the first time realizes who Claire actually is. To say this is kind of awkward is an understatement. And I have to say, the way Joan is playing her character, she's very sympathetic, and I feel bad for her because the character is unaware that cheaters, no matter how elevated or how romantic they think they are, they never leave their wives. And this in turn leads to Joan's biggest scene. And I think this is one of the first acting performances for Joan where you really get to see her act and emote. And I think it's glorious, and I think she does a great job with the role, even though it's a little campy. So in the end, Mary and Jimmy end up together. She continues to go by Minnie while Woodruff runs after Claire and begs to be taken back. I kind of really like the ending where Mary breaks her fake glasses, as it really represents all her illusions being shattered and just embracing who she actually is. It's really a great symbolic ending that just ties everything up nicely. So now it's time for some final thoughts. So my final thoughts on this wonderful film are that I really enjoyed it. It's not one of those films where you laugh out loud at the situations like a screwball comedy, but the dialogue is written in a humorous way that kind of makes you smile along as the words are being spoken, and I really appreciate the character development that Mary's character goes through in the film. And it's one where a truly naive character like this, I don't really see done a lot. I mean, there's one in Emma or Clueless, but I don't really, aside from that, I can't really think of another scene where there's a very naive character who doesn't understand the situations they're getting themselves into fully all the time. And even though what she's doing can be considered as unsympathetic, I can't help but feeling sympathy for her, and it's the way Joan plays her, with this like sparkling naivete that is really kind of believable and very likable. But I can't end the review without pointing out how great of a performance that Greer Garson has in this film. And while this is undoubtedly a Joan Crawford picture, I have to speak a heresy and say that Greer walks off with the movie. I mean, she's so convincing as the wounded wife that it's hard for me not to feel sorry for her. I can only imagine how this would have made Joan feel at the time, as Greer was the star that was really going to take her place at MGM. I mean, MGM was building her up as the next great star and giving her the vehicles and the roles that were really meant for Joan, or would have gone to Joan prior to Greer Garson being signed. But nonetheless, I think both performers gave phenomenal performances in this light dramedy, and I really loved it. I'm going to have to give the film a 3.5 stars out of 4. And I would definitely recommend this to anyone that wants to see it. So thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more of this Joan January.